A routine security audit found that /users/ad returned a field called hashed password, a bcrypt hash, in plain sight. The developer returned the ORM model directly, and FastAPI serialized every column. Let's break down FastAPI response models and status codes, how it works, and the exact mistake behind that failure. Response models and status codes define the shape and semantics of your API's output. The response model enforces a pedantic schema on the response body, serializing and filtering fields automatically. The status code sets the HTTP status code returned on success. Together, they form a typed, documented contract between your server and clients. Status codes are not decoration. They are a machine-readable contract that every HTTP client, proxy, and monitoring tool reads before looking at the response body. FastAPI lets you declare the status code at the decorator level, which means it's documented in OpenAPI automatically. Use the status module instead of magic numbers. Status. HTTP 2.01 created is self-documenting in code reviews and prevents typos. For 204, return none explicitly. Any body content causes a protocol violation. The response model is your most powerful tool for data masking. Even if your database query returns a full ORM object, FastAPI filters it through the pedantic schema, ensuring only whitelisted fields reach the consumer. It doesn't just validate, it actively strips. Here, even if we return the full user dict containing the password, the response model strips it before transmission. The password field is absent from user public profile, so it's automatically removed. HTTPException is not just an error, it's a control flow mechanism. When raised, FastAPI catches it before your function returns, preventing any further code from executing. The detail field can be a string or a structured dict for machine-readable error codes. Here, if the module is restricted, we raise HTTPException with a 403 status and a custom header. The endpoint stops immediately and returns the error response. Stop returning your database objects. Define separate input and output schemas. Your database model contains everything: primary keys, password hashes. Your response model should only expose what the client needs. We return the internal UserInDB object, but FastAPI filters it down to only the fields in user response. The password hash never reaches the client. FastAPI gives you 3 knobs to control what actually shows up in the response. These are critical when your internal data has optional fields, default values, or nullable columns that shouldn't pollute the API response. Here, isActive is unset and deleted at is none. With exclude unset and exclude none, both are stripped from the response, keeping the payload lean. This is the same issue we highlighted at the start. Here's exactly why that happened. The developer returned the SQL Alchemy user model instance directly without a response model. FastAPI's default behavior is to serialize all columns via the model's dict. Without a whitelist, every column, including hashed password, was exposed. Omitting response model causes FastAPI to serialize the raw ORM object, exposing internal fields like password hashes. Adding a pedantic response model filters the output to only public fields. The fix was to add a user public profile pedantic model with only safe fields and set response model equals user public profile on the endpoint. We also added a CI-lint rule that flags any endpoint returning an ORM model without an explicit response model, and a test that asserts hashed password is never present in any GET response body. When you annotate the return type and set response model, FastAPI validates twice. For large objects, this doubles serialization latency. Use only response model on the decorator for hot paths. This is the exact mistake from the incident. Without a response model, FastAPI serializes every column in the ORM model. Always define a response model pedantic class with only whitelisted fields. 204 responses must not have a body. Returning a dict causes protocol violations. Ensure the endpoint returns none explicitly and remove any response model for 204 endpoints. Using magic numbers like 201 is error-prone. A typo like 2001 is a valid Python integer and won't be caught by linters. Use status. HTTP 201 created instead. The article mentions using the response parameter to change status codes dynamically, but doesn't show code. Here's an example for upsert logic. Return 201 for new resources and 200 for updates. The article discusses custom exception handlers, but doesn't show a full example. Here's a global handler that returns a branded JSON structure for all HTTP exceptions, including a requested for tracing. For large payloads, e.g., 10 MB lists, using response model can double memory and CPU usage due to per-object pydantic validation. Consider streaming responses or pagination for performance-critical endpoints, and avoid double validation by omitting return type hints when using response model. When your FastAPI responses are leaking data or returning wrong status codes, run these checks in order. First, search for endpoint's missing response model. Then, curl the endpoint and grep for sensitive fields. Finally, use curl-v to inspect the status code and headers. Let's run through some common interview questions. Explain the double validation problem. Using both return type hint and response model causes pydantic to validate twice, doubling latency for large objects. How to implement a custom global exception handler? Use @app, exception handler, starlet HTTPException, and return a JSON response with branded error structure. How to dynamically filter fields? Use response model include and response model exclude parameters on the decorator. And a few frequently asked questions. Should I return a dict or a pydantic model? Returning a pydantic model is best practice for IDE support, but either works if response model is set. How to change status code dynamically? Inject the response object and set response status code inside the function. How to exclude unset fields? Use response model exclude unset equals true in the decorator. To recap, always declare a response model on every endpoint to prevent data leaks. Use the status module for self-documenting status codes. Never return ORM objects directly, always map to a pydantic schema. And separate your input and output models for a clean contract. Ready to go deeper? Up next, FastAPI dependency injection, then FastAPI authentication, then FastAPI background tasks and async endpoints. Find them all at TheCodeForge.io. Thanks for watching. The full article and code examples are covered in detail at TheCodeForge.io.